Today for our daily cancellation, we turn to something that somehow manages to be so ludicrous that I had to spend about 30 minutes Googling it just to make sure that it wasn't some kind of joke or parody. It is, as it turns out, no joke, at least not intentionally. The Washington Free Beacon reports on the news, and I'll give you some of the background before we get to the really good stuff. Reading from the Free Beacon report, it says, top geologists condemn systemic white supremacy in the field of geoscience, which concerns the study of Earth and rocks, in a manifesto published at the scientific journal Nature Communications. The manifesto, which was spearheaded by Fort Hays State University geology professor Hendrada Ali and signed by 20 academics, asserts that the lack of black geologists demonstrates the bigoted roots of the science. They called on colleagues to quash the racist, quote, expectations around manners, clothing, hair, professional attire, language, and diction in an effort to boost diversity in the field. Quote, racism has led to the geosciences becoming one of the least diverse among all science and engineering fields. Racism thrives in geoscience. Geoscience organizations function alongside the same racist ideologies and practices shaping society. So they're addressing the lack of black people in the field of geology. This is no doubt a problem that has plagued your mind and haunted your dreams. I know that it has for me. I often wake up in a cold sweat, tossing and turning, my eyes wet with tears. My wife will turn to me and say, well, what's wrong? What is it? And I'll say, there's not enough. There's not enough. And she'll say, not enough what? Black geologists. We need more diversity in the geological sciences. This happens like 3 times a week. I'm seeing a therapist about it. Now, it's good that the people who published this paper are finally dealing with this problem. But as I said, this is only the background. We haven't gotten to the real headline here. And before we do, a little more from this paper, speaking in general terms about the need for more anti-racism education among those who study rocks, it says, quote, in considering anti-racism in the geosciences, we cannot ignore the intersecting identities of marginalized people. We must acknowledge the added burden of inequalities and oppression experienced by people and communities with these intersectional identities, such as black women who are subjected to both sexism and racism, or when class status, disability, gender expression, or sexual identity intersects with other minoritized identities. Indeed, focusing on only one axis of diversity has led to some gains only in more white women working as geoscientists, but has not increased the participation of BIPOC and other marginalized peoples. Okay, so this is your standard issue racial grievance mongering so far. The grievance mongers have identified a certain very specific area of society, in this case the field of geology, and decided arbitrarily that there should be more black people involved in it. And then they've decided, just as arbitrarily, that the lack of black people is due to racism. It couldn't just be that not as many black people feel like studying rocks for a living. Can't say I blame them. No. It has to be racism. That's what it is. This is all, as I said, pretty standard fare. And then we get to this. Listen very closely. And this again is real. Access implies that individuals can obtain the resources they need to safely pursue their scientific endeavors, regardless of location, instrumentation, site accessibility, and their identity. Historically, access has been limited to mostly able-bodied, white, cisgender, heterosexual men. As the geosciences strive to be more accessible, the community must recognize that BIPOC and other marginalized geoscientists are not marginalized geoscientists. Anyway, other marginalized geoscientists are not always safe in geoscience spaces. For example, holding objects, for example, a rock hammer, has been viewed as suspicious and continues to be used as a reason to call the police on black people, which can lead to the death of black individuals entirely because of racial profiling and an unjustified fear of black people. Okay, you heard that right. Geology is racist because black people are afraid of holding hammers. This makes me, among other things, feel bad for the black cashier who rang up my items at Home Depot last week. I mean, imagine the psychological trauma he must suffer on a daily basis. And why are black people afraid of hammers? Well, because if they hold one, somebody might call the cops, and then the cops will come and shoot them. In fact, this is a problem, we're told, with all physical objects in general. According to the paper, any activity that requires holding an object of any kind can be construed as racist because of how it endangers black lives. You might not have known this, but if you have ever worked at, say, the concession stand at a movie theater, and you handed a black customer his large bucket of popcorn after he paid for it, you just put his life in jeopardy. Somebody should have come and smacked that popcorn out of your hands and said, no, don't do that. You're going to kill this man. What are you doing? That's an object. He can't hold an object. I mean, you should know better, honestly, than to go around giving objects to people of color. It is your unique privilege as a white person to hold objects. Other races of people don't have that ability. They just don't. Now, you may ask many questions, such as, has there ever been a case, ever in history, even once, of a black geologist being shot by the cops for using a hammer to break open some rocks? The paper would seem to indicate that this is an epidemic. I know it's not an epidemic. I'm just wondering, has it ever happened at all at any point? Since the inception of the field of geology, has any geologist of any color or race been killed by the police in the course of their duty for using a hammer? And by the way, if geology excludes black people because of how it requires the use of hammers, what about the construction field? If people of color avoid geology because they don't want to risk their lives by holding objects, what are they doing in construction? I mean, in that field, white people are underrepresented. Almost 20% of construction workers are Hispanic and 12% are black, which is proportional with the general population. If anyone was going to be shot for using a hammer on the job, you'd think it'd be a construction workers who oftentimes are working in cities and populated areas, not geologists out chipping away at some limestone in the desert somewhere. But here I am replying rational thought to what is wholly irrational. The leftist religion dictates that everything, everywhere must be racist. And it's up to them to, fill in the blanks and explain the hows and whys. And in fairness to them, it's not easy to find racism in geology of all things, and this is basically the best they could do. It was an admirable attempt, we must say, but still insane. And for that, they are, of course, today canceled. Well, I hope you enjoyed that clip from the Matt Walsh Show. If you did, go ahead and hit that subscribe button right down there so you can stay up to date on all of our future content.